Hello everyone, thank you for joining our webinar today, Helping Mitigate Risk, What You Need to Know About Volunteer Background Screening, presented by the National Healthcare for the Homeless Council and Verified Volunteers. If you have any technical problems during the presentation, please write to Caroline in the box at the bottom of your screen, or you can call our office at 615-226-2292 and ask for Lori, and she will help you out. This webinar is being recorded and will be archived on our website within 5 to 7 business days. If you have questions for our presenter today, you can feel free to type your questions in the same chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to address them in the last 10 minutes or so. So I am Michael Durham. I'm the Membership Coordinator at the National Healthcare for the Homeless Council, and I'll be moderating today's presentation. I'd like to begin by telling you a little bit about the Council, then we'll take a quick poll before introducing our presenter. So for those of you who may not be familiar with our work, the Council was founded along with the Healthcare for the Homeless program in the early 90s, and as its membership association has helped to grow the HCH program from 19 original sites to now 296. But in addition to federally funded HCH programs, more than a quarter of our organizational members are non-HCH grantees, such as free clinics, primary care associations, and other homeless services nonprofits. We support our members with training, technical assistance, research, and advocacy with expertise on what makes homeless healthcare unique. And finally, I want to shamelessly plug the next National Healthcare for the Homeless Conference and Policy Symposium, June 21st through 24th, 2017 in Washington, D.C. Registration opens in January, and we very much hope you plan to attend because our conference is the best, but I'm not biased. So now I'm going to start a poll, so I hope everybody, I'm going to initiate this and take a couple moments to answer the poll here. It should have just appeared on your screen. Okay, I will go ahead and end that poll. Sweet. Now I'm going to ask a second question here. And please answer that second question. Interesting. Okay. I'm going to close that poll now too. Great. So that was interesting. I'm going to go ahead now and introduce our speaker today. Kim Chochon has been with Verified Volunteers for a year, and prior to joining VV, she managed partnerships in the ID verification world. She brings 18 years of sales and marketing experience to the service sector, and her primary responsibility at Verified Volunteers is spearheading strategic alliances and building long-term business relationships. Kim is a trusted resource and is here to help educate everyone on how to better understand the components of background screening and the important role it plays to safeguard your organization. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kim.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you great.
Great. So those results from the poll were interesting. I noticed that about 50% of you are screening volunteers, and I'll dive into that a little deeper into the webinar. But I first want to say on behalf of Verified Volunteers, we are very enthusiastic about this partnership and are looking forward to supporting your members. The purpose of this webinar is threefold. I'd like to provide some education on background screening and address some misperceptions, as well as provide some useful information for your members. And then secondly, it's an opportunity for each of you to reevaluate your current screening program and ensure you are following best practices to safeguard your reputation and people. And then lastly, I'd like to reiterate to everyone that I'm here as a resource. I know background screening can be complicated and sometimes overwhelming, and I'm here as well as everybody at Verified Volunteers to help in any way that we can. So just having a little bit technical difficulty here. There we go. What I have in store for you today is I'm going to go through 7 key things that will help mitigate risk within your organization. Keep in mind that some of this applies to employee screening as well, and overall volunteers should be treated just like employees because they are representing your organization. This webinar is primarily focused on providing education for background screening, but after that I do want to share some insight into verified volunteers and our parent company Sterling Talent Solutions and touch on some key differentiators. And then we will have a Q&A session open at the end. And I should be able to cover all this in under an hour and possibly leave you guys a little extra time at the end. But keep in mind, at the end of the day, it really is all about working together to create safe environments for all of those people engaged within your organization, community health center, medical center, hospital, and the like. So I first wanted to share what's happening now in the news. In today's world, not only are the crazy things happening globally and nationally, but you will frequently see the criminal activity of volunteers occurring in your own city and making headlines. What this means is that criminal activity from volunteers is happening more than we realize. While we like to think all of those giving their time freely and those dedicated to serving others have squeaky clean images, we need to think again. Unfortunately, even the most trusted people in our lives end up being the ones who commit the crime. And this can even include someone dear to you. And I'd like to just tell you a story about what happened in July of this year in Clinton Township, Michigan. There was a woman who was the town's library clerk and who also served as a longtime treasurer of their Little League. She volunteered for various charities, including her local hospital, and was known as everyone's grandma and the person who always brought coffee for others to community meetings. Well, now I think I can speak for the majority that we all know someone like this. Well, this quote-unquote grandma ended up stealing over $300,000 over the years and was subsequently charged with embezzlement. As you can imagine, this really shook the community to its core. Public officials and nonprofit watchdogs noted that this type of behavior is actually becoming more common, and there is a mounting swarm of corruption cases. So I am very concerned about this, and that is why this webinar is so important. The main goal I have for you all is that you learn at least one new thing about background screening that you didn't know before today, and that you use this information to implement best practices within your organization. So the 7 important things I'll be reviewing is that screening is not just for vulnerable populations. Perception always doesn't match reality. And when it comes to screening, more is smarter. Outsourcing gets better results. The FCRA applies to volunteers as well. Screening can affect your insurance premiums. And then share some ways to save money and increase your ROI. So before I jump into these statistics, I'd like to give you some background on where they came from. Each year, we conduct a comprehensive study called Volunteer Screening Trends and Best Practices, and this piece of research is a joint effort with Points of Light, who is our core mission partner. For those not familiar with Points of Light, they are the world's largest volunteer organization dedicated to volunteer service. They are great collaborators, and we continue to work with them on ways to educate and break down barriers within volunteerism. So looking at the chart, it's not surprising that those organizations who are involved with youth development and mentoring have the highest percentage of screening all volunteers, which is around 78%. More concerning is the 43%. And this represents almost half, which leaves a wide open net for any volunteer to slip through the crack, ultimately creating an unsafe environment. As I previously mentioned, our job here at VV is to continue to educate everyone on why it is so important to screen every individual. This includes board members, to volunteers, to staff, and ultimately expose all the risks so that you can consider putting in a more comprehensive screening program in place. Not screening everyone means you are not only risking your overall safety, but you are also putting at risk your assets, reputation, and of course your people. The next section is misperceptions versus reality, and you're probably going to learn the most in this section. I first want to talk about the misperception of the national database. Almost all third-party screening providers tap into this database. We call it the nationwide, and it is also known as the NatCrim or Super Search, and there are some other names for it. And many believe it is a good enough and great resource. This is unfortunately not the case. The reality is there is not one single comprehensive, accurate, up-to-date, centralized database out there that exists that captures all felonies, misdemeanors, arrests, convictions, etc. Main reason is because national and federal databases rely on states to submit their records. Some that do are severely delayed, from 30 to 60 to 90 days old, and others don't submit at all. As a result, this leaves you open to greater risk. And with a multi-state super search, you are actually missing some critical areas such as California, New York, Colorado, and Chicago. So you just need to continually be cautious. Now, don't get me wrong, validating the nationwide database is still important as it casts a wide net. However, it should never be used as a standalone search because, again, some of the information is inaccurate, stale, and incomplete. I cannot stress enough that if you are relying on just one single source, you're exposing your organization to greater risk and likely missing important information about your volunteers and staff. The next misperception I would like to address is fingerprinting. Typically, the FBI's National Crime Information Center, the NCIC fingerprint database, has always been perceived as the gold standard and that it captures the majority of criminal records. Well, guess what? This is false. The reality is that the FBI's fingerprinting database is outdated due to backlogs and errors and contains only 50 to 55% of all available criminal records. This percentage is actually directly from the FBI. This is not us assuming this. These are all stats that we take directly from the DOJ. Part of the problem here, and I alluded to this earlier, is that some states just don't submit their records. A quick little story for you is that one of my coworkers was talking to a policeman, the chief of police in a Chicago jurisdiction, and he shared with her that the reason why they don't submit their records to federal is because if they show a lower crime rate, it means they get more funding for the next year. And this is just one story of many that contribute to an inaccurate fingerprinting database. And that is also why the NCIC database only sees a 1 to 2% hit rate. This literally leaves millions of outstanding criminal fingerprint records. As I mentioned, you don't want to rely on just one single source, such as the nationwide. When it comes to screening, more is more. More is better, and more is definitely smarter. Think of a background check as a piece of Swiss cheese. There are holes to fill to make sure nothing slips through, and by layering multiple databases, you are covering those areas that previously may not have been checked. One of those searches to layer is going directly to the courthouse. This is the primary source. This is where current county, state, and local arrest records are housed, as well as sheriff's offices. This is at the core of safe screening and a recommended best practice. And as I mentioned, including the nationwide is in one of your searches represents a good national foundation, but still has limitations, and that is why it's so important to layer your searches. So what else is important? One of the most important searches out there is the NSOPW, and that stands for the National Sex Offender Public Website. This was based on the Drew Sogene story out of Minnesota, where she was eventually raped and killed by a man who crossed state lines. And this is an important database because it is a real-time database that covers all 50 states and provides information on the whereabouts of registered sex offenders regardless of state boundaries. Some screening providers, and actually a lot of them, only include a sex offender state database. So what that means is that you are missing 49 other states where the sex offense could have occurred. Again, a critical search, especially if you're dealing with vulnerable populations. The next one is a Social Security number trace. You may want to look at this validation because it will reveal prior addresses in the last 7 years of where that individual has lived. It's just another validation tool. Another one is advanced authentication. This would confirm their identity. Sometimes he or she really is, are they really who they say they are? This type of search will help confirm that. And then, of course, personal and professional references are also a good idea to check out, but sometimes not as reliable. And when applicable, of course, a motor vehicle record to check the driver's license past history can also reveal additional hits and records. And lastly, the Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC list. In today's world where heightened terrorism activity exists all across the U.S. and the world, this is a government watch list that is also highly recommended. So basically, overall, when you are conducting a background check, using multiple searches is key, and it allows you to check where they currently live. We found that 80% of crimes committed are in their current county of residence, but it is also recommended to check previous years' residences because more than a quarter of the crimes found occurred actually in counties, prior counties and states of residences. One last important thing to address before I touch on outsourcing is rescreening. The reason why this is paramount is that even if an individual's first background check comes back clear, anything can happen in subsequent months and years. Think of all those headlines I flashed across the screen. You can't assume every volunteer has a clean record, and that is why rescreening is so important. It helps to protect your organization and gives you peace of mind. Annual rescreening is highly recommended, and you really shouldn't wait 2 to 3 years before you screen again. If you haven't already, consider implementing this best practice of screening every year. And in fact, here at Verified Volunteers, we actually provide free monthly monitoring updates on volunteers within the first year because we know how important this issue is. Now I want to touch a little on outsourcing. From this slide, it shows that roughly 70% are outsourcing with a third-party vendor, and that's a strong percentage. The 13% that is still doing their own screening in-house most likely means they are experiencing a lot of headaches because of the manual work. And those just going to a single government source are most likely missing a lot of information, and volunteers are probably slipping through the cracks. So why is outsourcing the way to go? Basically, outsourcing gets better results. It relieves administrative burdens. And really the key to screening success is knowing where to search, knowing what information to search for, and knowing the compliance requirements in each state. This helps reduce the liability should something go wrong, and using an experienced third-party vendor with screening expertise will result in a more comprehensive screening program and ensure FCRA compliance date. So what is the FCRA? The FCRA is under the Federal Trade Commission, and it is the Fair Credit and Reporting Act that was passed in 1970 to protect consumers' privacy of personal information from any consumer reporting agency. They're called CRAs. Verified Volunteers is a CRA. Most background queries fall under the FCRA, and it can be tricky. You want to make sure you are keeping compliant. But really, what does this all mean to you? It means that the FCRA applies to volunteers too. There are 4 essential components to keeping compliant. Consent and disclosure statements every individual must sign. And it's a statement specific to their state. And they need to sign this in order for a background check to be performed. What makes it even more complex is that depending on the state, there could be different consent forms. If something does show up on a background check, there is an official process that needs to be followed per the FCRA guidelines, and this is called adverse action. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty details, as you should always consult legal advice about the process, but there are specific pre- and post-adverse notifications, that need to be sent within a specified number of days to the volunteer or employee, and there needs to be a permissible purpose such as a volunteer background check. So no one really likes confrontation, and we know that it can be uncomfortable approaching a volunteer to let them know he or she is not eligible. Sometimes you need to consult a legal advisor to ensure you have a compliant policy in place. If rules are not followed to a T, you could actually get hit with a devastating lawsuit. And this brings me to another story from last year where a man sued Westmoreland, Virginia Little League because of an error in the background check that identified him as a sex offender when he had signed up to be a coach. I believe it was First Advantage who was the screening provider, but basically Robert Taylor's name showed up on a state sex offender registry, and come to find out, yes, he had the same name as a convicted sex offender. However, he had a different middle initial and even a different race. But Robert was still tagged as a sex offender, and it ruined his reputation. He won the lawsuit, but it wasn't First Advantage who had to pay. It was Westmoreland, which was just devastating for the Little League and the community. And the reason why I bring this story up is because this is not only a result of a low-quality background check, but it shows what can happen if you are not keeping compliance. So now I'd like to touch on the second to last most important screening item, and that is insurance premium. It used to be rather simple in that you could just check a box that confirmed you had volunteers within your organization. Well, changes have occurred in the umbrella liability insurance market, and nowadays insurance companies are cracking down. Our clients have shared with us that there are new requirements for volunteer background screening. More information is being collected from insurance companies, and if there is not a comprehensive screening program in place, you could actually get hit with higher premiums, or in some cases, some specialty liability coverages are denied without a complete screening program in place. The main takeaway from this is that if you are also not following best practices by insuring your volunteers, you could get hit with the higher premiums. And now we are at the last important piece of the background screening puzzle, and that is budget. It's not uncommon for nonprofit organizations to be operating with limited funds, and it can be challenging to find the money, time, and right resources it takes to conduct quality background checks. And sometimes organizations feel this is okay, that receiving a low quality check or even skipping screening altogether. Well, that's a very scary thought, and it's not uncommon that these organizations actually don't screen. Well, the good news is there is a solution. It doesn't necessarily have to cost a lot. So consider these facts. Screening not only helps save money in terms of insurance premiums, fraud, theft, and more, but it does help with your bottom line. You may think cutting corners on volunteer screening will save you money, but in the long run could actually end up costing you more. And you know what? Volunteers are usually willing to help. Take a look at volunteer contributions to help your ROI. Here at VV, we do over 1.5 million background checks annually. And we have a payment option that allows for volunteer contribution. 40% of volunteers happily contribute because it is not forced. And of that 40%, 91% of the cost ends up being covered. As you can imagine, the volunteer contribution option frees up additional monies that can be applied to other areas of importance within your organization. And the bottom line here is that in most cases, volunteers care deeply about who they are devoting their time to, and covering the cost of a background check or helping cover the cost isn't going to deter them from volunteering. So overall, if you're currently using a screening provider or considering switching or considering adding a screening provider to your best practices, it is highly recommended to get a better understanding of what you are receiving or what your screening provider provides. So don't hesitate to ask the tough questions. Some of those are, what is actually searched in my background check? Why do my results come back so quickly? What jurisdictions are covered in my region and specifically in my county and state? Are they going to the primary source? Is the courthouse being checked? These are where, as I mentioned before, where the most updated records are housed. And are my results compliant with the FCRA? This is huge, and that's why using a third-party screening provider helps with that, because you don't have to worry about keeping compliant. Answers to all these questions will ensure you have a comprehensive screening program in place. So to recap and to help your organization mitigate risk, outsourcing is the way to go and keeps you compliant, as I mentioned. The quality of background checks is also important, and actually very important. Safety is on the line, so don't be afraid to ask all those questions, and if you get the right answers, that means you've got a quality screening program in place. And also, as a reminder, cutting corners on screening will not necessarily save you money, and in the long run could end up costing you more. Without a solid volunteer screening program in place, you are risking your assets, reputation, people, and overall safety. So now that concludes the main background screening portion of the webinar. And I did want to highlight Verified Volunteers, what we're all about, and how we can help all of the members of the National Healthcare of Homeless Council. So basically, we are backed by Sterling Talent Solutions, and they are located in the heart of New York City, one of my favorite cities. Sterling is considered a global leader in background screening, and they have over 40 years of experience locally, nationally, and internationally. They invest a lot of capital and technology into Verified Volunteers, and this is important to share because it allows us to continually enhance our screening platform to meet the ongoing needs of all our clients, not only within the healthcare sector, but across all types of nonprofits. We are also proud and honored to be aligned with some amazing national organizations. Some of those include YMCA, CASA, Meals on Wheels, Girl Scouts, Johns Hopkins, American Cancer Society, and a plethora of others that aren't necessarily listed here. More specifically, to Verified Volunteers, is we have a unique value proposition in that we are the only background screening platform tailored to the specific needs of the service sector, and we are the first online community to mobilize repeat vetted volunteers. We initially spent over 9 months researching, including talking to over 400 nonprofits and thousands of volunteers, and that is what our dual-sided screening platform was built on, with the feedback that we received. Why does this matter? Well, our screening platform significantly helps streamline efficiencies. We have found that it saves time, money, and removes a lot of those headaches that come along with onboarding and screening. Ultimately, this helps make your job easier and frees up the critical time needed to focus on those other important matters within your organization and really keep you focused on your main mission. So some of our key differentiators that I wanted to point it out and what we're all about is the first one is quality and accuracy. Apples to apples, we provide the highest quality at lowest prices. We provide packages that layer multiple searches, as I previously talked about, 5 to 8 different types of searches so that you're really getting the highest quality of background check for your staff as well as volunteers. We also have industry-leading turnaround times. Right now, the average is between 24 to 48 hours. This is important if you're needing to screen volunteers immediately and get them up and running with your program. We can help do that. We also are, as I mentioned, a CRA, and we follow the strict guidelines of the FCRA. So we keep compliant, and we help you keep compliant. And one of my favorites that I like to talk about is our service. In the background screening industry, I don't know if any of you have experienced poor customer service, but it's very common. And here at Verified Volunteers, we have a dedicated customer service team called the Advocates, and we currently carry a 99.7 client retention rate. This number is a reflection of our accessibility and availability to help every step of the way. We also, for those familiar with Net Promoter Scores, NPS, or sometimes it's called an NPI, Net Promoter Index, we are at 73. The average in the screening industry is 15. So this again shows, and it's based on client satisfaction and service, and 73 is equivalent to what you'll see with an Apple or Trader Joe's if you have Trader Joe's in your area. And then the last one is we are innovators in technology. Our automated platform is very easy to use and understand. It's a first-class dual-sided platform. One side is for the administrator to log in, and the other side is for volunteers. The volunteers can perform a self-order, so once they receive an email invitation with an embedded invitation link from you, they log in and they can order their own background check. And this is done in 4 simple steps, and it takes less than 5 minutes to complete. So the volunteer owns their check, and you automatically receive a copy. And another thing I want to mention here that's not on the screen, but because that volunteer owns their check, we have a system called the Volunteer Fast Pass. And what that allows the volunteer to do is to share their background check. So if they're dedicating their time to multiple organizations that require a background check, and if you're the sponsoring organization that paid for all or part of their check, each time they share, I think it's the first 2 shares, you will actually receive a rebate of $2 to kind of fuel that sharing community and creating that mobile community of vetted volunteers that I had talked about. And I also wanted to just touch a little bit on employee screening. I know all of you do employee screening, and this can be managed under one umbrella for a streamlined process. There are a handful of NHCHC members actually already using our employee platform that's under Sterling, and it's great, and you can take advantage of the Verified Volunteer benefits because we honor the same pricing that we give you for volunteers. We extend that for your employees as well. And the reason why we do have to have it on 2 platforms is because there are varying needs for employees and volunteers, like I-9s, which aren't required for volunteers. But basically, for employee screening, we deliver efficiency just like Verified Volunteers, and have everything from drug testing, occupational health, I-9, E-Verify, complete criminal locator, fingerprinting, employee verification, and there's a lot more. Given that Sterling's been in business for 40 years, they pretty much do it all. So that concludes the webinar portion. There's more screening rules and regulations as they are constantly changing, and each state has different summary of rights and jurisdictions to follow. But know what you are getting, ask those tough questions, make sure you have a comprehensive screening program in place. Otherwise, as I mentioned, everything is at risk, especially the overall safety of your people. So now we can open it up for questions, and if any of you have anything that's pressing on your mind, please feel free to ask.
Well, Kim, we don't have any questions in the queue right now, so I think what I'll do is just thank everyone for joining today. A link of the archived webinar and the PowerPoint slides will be emailed to you within a few days. And when we close the presentation, an online survey will, to evaluate this webinar, will automatically open in your web browser. Please complete it to help us improve. So now this webinar will be closed. Thank you, everyone.